Picture this. You're sitting in your living room, Christmas tree twinkling away, fairy lights draped over everything that doesn't move, the heating cranked up because it's December and Britain's weather is doing its usual impression of a frozen tundra, and then your energy bill arrives. You open it, take one look at the numbers, and suddenly those festive lights don't seem quite so magical anymore. In fact, you're seriously considering whether Rudolph's red nose might be the only thing you can afford to keep illuminated this Christmas. According to Shadow Energy Secretary Coutinho, that's not just a joke, that's Labour's Britain, where the cost of electricity has skyrocketed so dramatically that we're apparently heading for a full-blown Christmas blackout. Now, whether you think that's legitimate political criticism or the most spectacular piece of seasonal scaremongering since someone claims Santa wasn't real, buckle up because we're about to dive into energy politics, Christmas chaos, and why your electricity bill is making you consider moving into a cave. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where we translate political drama into something that actually makes sense while you're trying to enjoy your mince pies. Today we're unpacking the Conservatives' claim that Britain is facing a Christmas blackout thanks to Labour's energy policies, why they reckon families are about to spend December huddled in the dark like Victorian orphans, and whether any of this is actually true or just really effective political theater. We've got claims of 17% electricity hikes, promises to cut bills by 20%, accusations of net zero madness, and a whole lot of finger-pointing about who's responsible for making Christmas significantly less merry. So grab your thermal socks and let's get into it. Right, let's start with a headline claim that's got everyone talking. Coutinho, the Conservative Shadow Energy Secretary, has come out swinging with what might be the most Christmas-themed political attack of the year. She's claiming that Labour's energy price hikes are making festive lights unaffordable and that Britain is headed for a Christmas blackout. Her exact words: "If Father Christmas gets lost, it'll be because Rudolph's red nose is the brightest thing left on." Now, that's either brilliant political messaging or absolutely shameless festive exploitation, depending on where you sit politically. But you've got to admit, it's memorable. Nobody's forgetting the image of poor Rudolph being the only source of light in Labour's Britain. So what's actually happened to energy prices? Well, according to the Conservatives, the cost of electricity has gone up by 3.99 pence per kilowatt hour under Labour, which works out to about a 17.8% hike. Now, if you're not an energy nerd, and let's be honest, most of us aren't, that might not sound like much, but when you translate that into actual pounds on your actual energy bill, especially during winter when you're running the heating constantly and keeping lights on all day because it gets dark at about 3 in the afternoon, that adds up fast, really fast. The Tories are pointing to the energy price cap, which climbed from £1,568 for July to September 2024, all the way up to £1,758 for January to March 2026. That's a £190 increase. And here's where it gets politically spicy. Keir Starmer promised before the election that Labour would help families save up to £300 off their energy bills. So not only has that not happened, but bills have actually gone up by nearly £200. That's not just failing to deliver on a promise, that's delivering the exact opposite of what you promised. It's like ordering a pizza and getting a bill for £300 and no pizza. Now, with Christmas coming, and yes, I know it feels like shops have had decorations up since approximately August, people are understandably worried about their energy costs. You're running the heating more because nobody wants to spend Christmas Day shivering. You've got lights on all day because British winter means daylight is basically a rumor. If you're hosting family, you're cooking more, using more appliances, generally consuming more electricity and gas. All of this adds up, and when energy prices are already through the roof, the prospect of a December energy bill is genuinely frightening for a lot of families. The Conservative solution? Overhaul the entire energy market by scrapping renewable subsidies and axing what they're calling the carbon tax. They claim this would cut electricity costs by 20%, saving the average family about £165. Coutinho's been incredibly clear about this. She reckons Labour's rush to net zero is making people poorer, and the only way to fix it is to bin the policies that are driving up costs. She's promised to repeal the 2008 Climate Change Act, which established legally binding carbon reduction targets. She wants to axe the emissions trading scheme and the carbon price support for electricity generation. Basically, she wants to tear up everything that's making energy companies price in environmental costs. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about what Labor is actually saying in response, because obviously they're not just sitting there nodding along going, yeah, fair point, we've ruined Christmas. A spokesman for the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero called the conservative claims pure bah humbug, which is either delightfully festive or absolutely shameless political dismissal depending on where you sit politically. But you've got to admit, it's memorable. Nobody's forgetting the image of poor Rudolph being the only source of light in Labor's Britain. So what's actually true versus what's political theater? Energy prices have definitely gone up. That's not disputed. The energy price cap has increased and families are paying more. That's a fact. Whether that's directly Labor's fault is where things get murky. Energy prices are influenced by global factors. The war in Ukraine massively disrupted European energy markets, wholesale gas prices fluctuate based on international supply and demand, and Britain's energy infrastructure has been underinvested in for decades, regardless of which party was in power. But Labour did make a specific promise about cutting energy bills by £300, and that hasn't happened. You can argue about circumstances, about global factors, about inherited problems, but at the end of the day, voters remember promises. When you promise to cut energy bills and then energy bills go up instead, that's a political problem. It doesn't matter how good your explanations are, people are opening bills that are higher than they expected, and they remember being told things would get cheaper. Now, let's talk about the conservative proposals, because they're not without controversy either. Scrapping renewable subsidies and axing carbon taxes would likely reduce electricity costs in the short term. That's probably true. But here's the catch. Those policies exist for a reason. The Climate Change Act, the Emissions Trading Scheme, the carbon price support, these aren't just arbitrary regulations designed to annoy people and make energy expensive. They're mechanisms to incentivize the transition away from fossil fuels and towards cleaner energy. The theory being that if you don't price in the environmental cost of burning fossil fuels, you're essentially subsidizing pollution and setting yourself up for even bigger problems down the line. The conservatives' argument is essentially net zero is making people poorer right now, and we should prioritize affordability over climate targets. It's a legitimate political position, especially when you've got families genuinely struggling to pay their bills. If you're choosing between heating your house and some abstract climate goal decades in the future, you're going to pick heating your house every single time. The Tories are betting that voters care more about their immediate financial situation than about carbon reduction targets for 2030 or 2040. Labor's counterargument is that investing in clean energy will actually reduce bills in the long term by making Britain less dependent on volatile international fossil fuel markets. The idea being that if we generate more of our own renewable energy, wind, solar, nuclear, we're insulated from gas price spikes when Russia invades somewhere or OPEC decides to mess with supply. It's a long-term investment versus short-term relief argument, and both sides have a point. The question is what voters prioritize right now, when their bills are high and Christmas is expensive. Coutinho's language is worth examining too, because it's incredibly loaded. She keeps talking about Ed Miliband's mad rush to net zero and net zero madness. That's not accidental. She's framing climate policy not as a necessary transition, but as ideological extremism that's hurting ordinary people. By calling it madness, by making it sound like Labor is pursuing some unhinged agenda rather than responding to climate science, she's positioning the Conservatives as the sensible, pragmatic party that cares about real people's real problems rather than abstract environmental goals. And you know what? That messaging probably works with a lot of voters, because when you're struggling to pay your bills, when you're worrying about whether you can afford to have the heating on, being lectured about carbon reduction targets feels pretty tone-deaf. It feels like politicians prioritizing their preferred policies over your immediate welfare. Whether that's fair or not is debatable, but politically, it's effective. The warm home discount that Labor spokesman mentioned is worth understanding. It's a £150 discount on electricity bills for low-income households, and Labor has expanded it to about 6 million households this winter. That's not nothing. For families who qualify, £150 off their electricity bill is genuinely helpful. But here's the thing, it doesn't change the overall cost of electricity. It's a subsidy, which means taxpayers are covering part of people's electricity bills rather than electricity actually being cheaper. And for the millions of households who don't qualify but are still struggling, it's not much comfort. There's also a bigger philosophical question here about energy policy and who should pay for the transition to net zero. Labor's approach is essentially, we need to transition to clean energy. Some costs are unavoidable, but we'll help the poorest households through subsidies and discounts. The Conservatives' approach is, scrap the policies driving up costs, make energy cheaper for everyone, and deal with climate change in ways that don't make people poorer. Those are fundamentally different visions, and there's no objectively correct answer. It depends on how you weigh present costs versus future benefits, how seriously you take climate change as a threat, and what you think the government's role should be. The Christmas blackout framing is obviously hyperbolic. Britain is not literally going to experience power cuts because people can't afford to turn on their lights. But as political messaging, it's brilliant because it taps into real anxiety. People are genuinely worried about their energy bills over winter. They're making calculations about how much heating they can afford, whether they can justify having Christmas lights up, whether they need to cut back on other things to cover higher energy costs. By framing it as a Christmas blackout, Coutinho's making an abstract policy debate feel immediate and personal. And let's be honest, the Rudolph line is going to get shared everywhere. It's silly, it's memorable, it's the kind of soundbite that cuts through in ways that detailed policy explanations never do. Is it substantive political critique? Not really. Is it effective political communication?